Welcome back to the True Crime Fan Club podcast. I'm your host, Lainey. I came across this case by sheer happenstance. I was tagged in a thread that was started by a Jayce Schweiger in the podcast we listen to group on Facebook. He posted a link to a news article about a Delaware man who was acquitted of murder, but then later confessed to committing the crime and bribing an alibi witness. An unnamed person had recorded the confession and turned it over to police. The man who confessed was Jayce Schweiger, and the man he confessed to was his twin brother, Jayce. Okay, on to the show.
We were born a month premature, born October 11th, 1988 in Brooklyn, New York. We held a lot of pride in that. We've always been proud of being from New York. My mother always had multiple jobs. My father was a cab driver, not a yellow cab, but like a gypsy cab, I guess you call it. And my mother was everything from an auxiliary police officer to working at Dunkin' Donuts, because my father's hours were just insane. Not that he wasn't around, but he was kind of limited in how much time he spent with us. And then there became the issue of my father's drinking. As much as it's hard to acknowledge sometimes, my father was abusive. My father was also an alcoholic for a very long time, drank a lot. And then there would be times when he would get carried away and hit us or discipline us. And it got carried away. I remember somebody's head was slammed against the wall. You know, we would come home and just will be boys. Kind of act out. You know, we want to wrestle. We want to play around. We don't want to do our homework. And we would get shoved around the house to the point where this aggression kind of sticks with me, where if somebody raises their hand above their shoulder level, I'm automatically on the defensive. I want to protect whatever it is that's about to happen. I want to stop whatever it is that's about to happen. Being raised by a single mother, I'm all about protecting women. Jerry and I were both diagnosed with PTSD, ADHD, and learning disabilities. I would like to attribute this to the fact of having a broken home, but then again, I don't want to make the excuse that that's what it's all about. Oh, it's a broken home. With having, I guess, ADHD and PTSD and things like that, we required counseling until we were 10, maybe 11. We would see counselors. We used to take Adderall and things like that for behavioral issues, Ritalin. We would take sleep aids because we would just be anxious and rambunctious. But of course, that was the time when medication was the go-to for anybody who was acting out. Between that and having family, local to watch us and take care of us and things like that, Jerry and I never really had a bad time. We always hung out. I mean, we were each other's keeper, just like they always say, you are your brother's keeper. There was a time when I'd got hurt. I was out with family. I'd gotten hurt. And with the twin connection, he knew that. He felt that. And then there was a time when he got hurt that it was documented when I would feel his pain. Jerry was a bit of the rebel rouser. He had 7 sets of stitches before we were 7 years old. Everything from we're playing tackle football and he tackles a bench, or we're chasing after girls and I kick a fence into his face because I thought I was just going to close it. And he was too close, and the hook caught him above his other eye. And, breaking cups and plates at home when we were probably 3 or 4, and then he jumped straight into the glass and required stitches on his feet. Jerry also had to have his tongue stitched back into his mouth because he wouldn't listen to our teachers in school. In the auditorium, we had folding chairs. He was sitting on the edge. He was told multiple times not to sit on the edge. Was sitting on the edge talking, slipped off the edge of the seat, slamming his chin into the chair in front of him, biting his tongue off. There's always been an adventure with us.
Prior to our interview, Jayce sent me some pictures of his brother Jerry. I was taken aback by how identical they looked. I know, that sounds silly, but I was talking to him over Skype and was really hoping that the man on my screen was indeed Jayce. I told him about my thoughts and asked him if he's experienced any negative or hostile encounters because he was an identical twin.
We always joked that we were going to play a prank on our teachers. We would, switch classes with each other. It didn't bother me until high school when Jerry got into some trouble with girls, couldn't keep his hands to himself, would get into fist fights at school, or would become really aggressive with people. And people not being able to tell the difference between him and I would say, things to me, why'd you say that to somebody, or want to tell me things about him, and I would have to explain that, hi, I'm his twin. I've been at this school longer, and you still can't tell what the hell's wrong with you. There were many times when a teacher would approach him to talk about me, and he would have to explain, that's my twin. And then there would be teachers that would approach me about him, and I would have to explain that, no, he's my twin. Welcome to our world. This is a constant confusion that we have to deal with a lot of the times from a lot of different people. It happened all the time, and sometimes to this day, it still continues to happen. If it wasn't for the fact that I do have two different colored eyes, a lot of people would likely think that I was him.
As the two boys entered high school, their lives began to take different paths. Jayce at times was still pulled into his brother's very rocky world.
When I was 16 years old, I wanted to be in the military, and you had to be off all medications for 2 years to be accepted into the military without a doctor's note. I stopped taking all the medication, and that is also the time when Jerry, he goes by Jerry as well, was actually sleeping with and dating a 50-plus-year-old woman who allowed him to do whatever he wanted, whenever he wanted. He left the home that we were in, who then started homeschooling him, and he got a graduation party, which it sounds so stupid and irrelevant, but the fact of she homeschools her children. She has a child who is she has two children who are handicapped, and believes that the only way they're going to get appropriate education is through homeschool. She told Jerry that he could have the world. She would homeschool him. He didn't have to go to school anymore. Told him he didn't have to listen to his mother anymore. And he ended up living with her. And one day, she actually came knocking on our door. Her name was Lori. She came knocking on our door because her husband didn't like Jerry anymore and wanted him out. Jerry convinced me that we had to go beat up her husband to get him to go away. And the only way that we would be allowed out of the house is we had to have a family meeting with my mother and explain to her how abused she was, and how she needed our help. And we tried to have this family meeting with our mother to allow us to leave the house. She, of course, didn't know that we were going to go try to beat this guy up. But we were trying to have this family meeting to explain that, we needed to go help her. She's in danger. We're going to go help. And when our mother declined us leaving the house and refused to have a family meeting, my brother and I left, and we had the police called on us by our mother. We were labeled as runaways, kept in a juvenile home for a week. And with that, it kind of all spiraled out of control from there. We were allowed back in our house around Thanksgiving. I stayed with my mother. My brother went back to this lady's house, and that's when it kind of broke down from there. And when we went back home and Jerry went back to the house, her husband left and never came back. So Jerry then became the man of that house with Lori. And I continued to go to school until I was 16. And I actually got beat up in school. And the school never did anything about it, so I dropped out of school. And I started to work. Jerry continue to sleep in until 3 or 4 o'clock, do his homeschooling at this lady's house, eat all of her food, do whatever he wanted because he was the man of the house. He was doing things like, the laundry and the dishes and things like that. Jerry developed an abusive streak. And with that, Jerry would constantly beat up other people and not really do anything. He wouldn't steal from them. He wouldn't do anything that to take anything away from them, just to show aggression, just to show that he was the man and he could beat somebody up. And I had actually gotten incarcerated as a juvenile and spent 18 months in a juvenile detention center for setting something on fire. And I found out that my brother was arrested at Lori's house because Lori tried to tell him he couldn't do something or he wasn't allowed to do something. And we were only 17. And Jerry pretty much choked her out, put her in a chokehold to prove, I guess, that he could or that he was the man of the house. And when he did that, he was sent to a residential treatment center for juveniles somewhere in North Dakota or South Dakota. And I believe he was there for a year.
While we were talking about Jayce and Jerry's high school years, an interesting story popped up.
There was an old girlfriend of his named Kimberly Holton, who back in 2003 was murdered by somebody that she was dating.
To elaborate, Kimberly Holton was 16 years old when she was murdered by Michael Kaiser and Jacob Jones. Jacob dated Kimberly's foster stepsister, Heather. On September 30th of 2003, she was lured to a budget inn in Dover, Massachusetts. The men wanted to kill her because she and her stepsister did not get along. However, Heather later shared that Kimberly may have been dating Jacob behind her back. She does recall sharing with Jacob that Kimberly was making her life very miserable. Whatever the reason, she entered the room, and after a night of drinking and smoking marijuana, the two men beat her and strangled her until she was dead. They then went to Lowe's to pick up cinder blocks and chain locks to weigh her body down. Jacob chartered a small plane and dumped her body over the Atlantic Ocean. Her body would be found a week later, on October 8th. Jacob was arrested first, and a little over 24 hours after his arrest, he committed suicide. Michael Kaiser was arrested for first-degree murder and later found guilty. He was sentenced to life in prison. Jayce remembers Jerry's reaction to the news that Kimberly had been murdered. He recalls that his brother was nonchalant, but attributes this to the fact that he and Kimberly didn't date for very long, and he had little contact with her after their breakup. As Jayce matured, it seemed as if Jerry was still stuck. And even though he was the older twin, he tried really hard to emulate his younger brother.
Like I said, we had just turned 20, 21, maybe 22. And Jerry doesn't own a car. Jerry doesn't really have a stable relationship. And he constantly tried to live my life. Now, when I turned 21, I got a job at a bar. I started off being the bouncer, then moved to bartender, barback, cook, DJ, etc. I was doing all the jobs. Then I became management, a key holder. I was opening the doors at 4 o'clock in the afternoon and locking down at 2 o'clock in the morning. Jerry would come in and have a beer, and I would pay for him, of course. As my brother, I'm not going to make the man pay for beers. I run this place. Jerry then went and got a job at another strip club, a competitor strip club. And, okay, so Jerry is a barback. He doesn't have what's called an ABC card, which is required to serve beer and liquor here in the state of Delaware. He doesn't have one, so he can't actually serve beer. I'm serving beer. Then I became the DJ at my bar. Jerry became the DJ at his bar. And then when I became the cook at my bar, Jerry became the cook at his bar. I went and got tattoos. Jerry had to have tattoos. I went and got piercings. Jerry had to have better piercings than me. So if I got my tongue pierced, he got his tongue pierced, then his eyebrow pierced. He always had to try to one-up me. Now, I had been getting ready to have my first child, my daughter. And my wife, my then girlfriend, because we weren't engaged yet, we found out that she was pregnant. My brother came into the bar with a bottle of Jameson and poured around for the staff. This way we didn't have to pay for it. And he just kind of led his own life while I try to lead mine, while he's trying to lead mine for me. Jerry is the older brother. We are twins, but he is older by 35 seconds, and he constantly uses that, mostly in a joking way, to say, I'm older than you, you got to listen to me. Yeah, okay, whatever, Jerry. I didn't ever want to listen to my brother. I never really trusted his advice to begin with, but that's just the way brothers are, I'd like to assume. When we found out that my girlfriend at the time was pregnant, and I had been dating my girlfriend since high school. We've been together since 2005, and we'd been together for a while. Well, we were settling down. We were now having a family. We had a place to live out in another state. It was a 40-minute drive back and forth to work for me. I was starting to notice that he had to always outdo me. So I would never tell him what I was doing. If I was going to buy a new car, I would never tell him. I would just show up in one. If I got a raise at work, I would never tell him because I didn't want him to say, oh, but I make this much more than you. And again, you would think that would come from an older sibling, several years older, but we're twins. And he always tried to outdo me. He always tried to be better than me. And again, having a child really calmed me down, really settled me down. I was really expecting him to be the same way. And then Jerry meets Jen Barnes. When my child was born, he took his bicycle and arrived at the hospital and, had to be the uncle that was there and supportive and spent pretty much the day at the hospital with me and took a lot of pictures with his new niece. And everything seemed fine at the time. Jen wasn't really welcome. I mean, nobody knew her. Not that she was unwelcome, but I'm glad he came by himself. Nobody knew Jen. Nobody knew anything about her other than what Jerry was saying. So they met at high school, and now she's pregnant. And I guess nobody really cared. I particularly didn't care where she was. She had 3 other children to watch and take care of.
While Jayce's life progressed positively, Jerry would meet the woman who would change the course of his life forever. Jennifer Barnes was a 23-year-old single mother of 3. When she met Jerry, she was still living with her father, Tony Mosick Sr. I asked Jayce if their relationship was tumultuous.
No, I mean, it was a pretty smooth relationship. I mean, typical couple picture, the kissing pictures, the hanging out with my boo pictures on Facebook and social media. But it didn't seem like there was a lot of drama. I mean, if I called Jerry, you could always hear the kids, playing or yelling and screaming in the background, but nothing that would indicate that there was an issue in that home. It was more about the kids are just being kids. They're playing a little loud. Who cares? There seemed to be an issue more with my brother and the father. Mr. Mosick apparently was disabled, some form of disability, and took a lot of medication for them. And when he took these medications, it was a toss-up between if he's going to be zoned out, asleep and quiet, or if he was going to become aggressive and disrespectful. There may have only been 1 or 2 incidents that I can recall prior to all this where my brother had called me and said, man, this old asshole is just being a jerk again. And I'm like, okay, well, who and what are you talking about? Jen's dad is just yelling and screaming and being nasty to the kids. And I don't know what to do, man. I'm like, you should probably just leave. Like, I don't know. Find a way to leave the house. Find a way to get out of there. Take the kids with you. Let him zone out on his own medication and go into his bedroom.
Tony Mosick Sr. seemed to not only have a problem with Jerry, he also had a problem with the law. In July of 2012, Tony Mosick Sr., his son, Tony Mosick Jr., and 3 other men were arrested for growing marijuana in their home. They were turned in by an anonymous tipster. He was later charged with possession of a controlled substance and second-degree conspiracy, and was released on a $6,000 unsecured bond. Jayce recalls Jerry being very upset by the bust.
My brother was concerned that this would mean that the kids were going to get taken away, that he would wind up getting in trouble for it. So he's always held that animosity towards Tony Sr. for putting his kid at risk. Now, I say his kid because even though Jen had 4 now, he had only had the 1. So my primary concern was my nephew. Okay, well, is he okay? Yes. Okay, then really that's all that matters to me. I'm pretty sure they're going to recognize that you had nothing to do with it. You were at work. Jen had nothing to do with it. She's taking care of her children. If the other guys are outside and they're chopping down marijuana plants, that's really none of your concern. That's really none of your business. You have other things to worry about. You have other things to do. Go to work. Go play with your children. They're not going to get taken away because somebody's growing marijuana outside their house. And around Christmas, maybe a month before Christmas, it turned into a physical fight. This fist fight culminated in my brother getting arrested, Jen getting arrested, and a restraining order being put in place. And Jerry was told to not go to the house, in the house, for any reason whatsoever. This bothered my brother. He took his bicycle and he went back to Lori's house. So he was going back and forth probably 40 miles into almost Maryland to go have a place to sleep, have a roof over his head, have somewhere so that he wouldn't freeze to death in the middle of the night. Like I said, this was the middle of December that this had happened. My brother saw no reason why his son and the mother of his child got to stay together and he couldn't be a family with them. So he went back on several occasions while this guy was on his medication and calm and either sleeping or zoned out, just not paying attention to who's coming and going in the house. And that was December of 2012, right before the murder.
What I learned from my interview with Jayce was that Jerry just wanted to be with his family. He couldn't stand to stay away from his child, and while it seemed that things had calmed between the 2 men, things quickly escalated. Authorities believe the murder took place on January 5th, 2013, at approximately 11 p.m. Jennifer had once again invited Jerry over to the home she shared with her father. He was confronted by Tony Sr. and was told that he was no longer permitted in his home and that he was going to call the police. They fought for a time until Jerry pulled out a small pocket knife. He began repeatedly stabbing Tony Mosick Sr. He was finally getting rid of the man who had stood in the way of the family life he always wanted. Most people believe that Jennifer helped Jerry kill her father. Here's why. When the small pocket knife he was using wasn't enough, he asked Jennifer for another knife. In total, Tony had 15 stab wounds to his neck, torso, and face. Here's what Jayce remembers.
There was a debate whether Jen helped to kill her father. It was said that she sat on his chest while my brother choked him. It was said that my brother sat on his chest while she tried to cut his throat. And this is still up for debate. This has not been proven either way.
I asked Jayce about the kids. Were they present during the murder?
From what I understand, yes, they were. From what I understand, they were in the house at the time of the murder. And I know my nephew wasn't even a year old yet. I don't know how old her other children were at the time. And I do know that apparently whatever my nephew saw or heard or comprehended at that time affects him.
After the murder, Jerry and Jennifer were faced with a dilemma. They had to figure out what to do with the body.
I don't know exactly if they wrapped him up in the carpet or if they wrapped him up at all, how they did it, what they did. But apparently his body was moved to a 55-gallon drum large enough to hold a body. Because neither one of them owned a vehicle, the body stayed in the shed behind the house for a day or so, while Jen then borrowed her grandmother's vehicle again, an SUV, large enough to hold this drum with her father in it, went about 100 yards away from the house and dumped the body in the Lipstick River and kind of just carried on like nothing had ever happened.
He's right. The day after the murder, Jennifer got onto her Facebook account and posted the following. Would like to say happy birthday to Martin and Greg. Happy birthday, guys. Hope you had a good one. Perhaps this was to cover the heinous murder she possibly helped commit in front of her young children. However, they wouldn't be able to lay low for long. Someone would eventually notice that Tony was missing. And on January 8th, 2013, that someone was his mother. He failed to stop by her house to pick up his daily medication. Police came to her home to get her statement. She said the last time she heard from her son was the night of January 5th, 2013. She noted that in the past, while he may have not returned phone calls, he always stopped by for his medication. The 8th finally came and went, and she knew something was wrong. Police, through their investigation and interviews, found out about the altercation that occurred on December 12th, 2012. Remember, this is when Jerry had the no-contact order issued against him. Police suspected that there was enough cause to stop by and search the house where Tony Mosick Sr. was last seen alive.
A warrant was issued to search the home, and when a police officer went in and searched the home, they noticed that the carpet was a strange color, like a different color from the rest of the house. Not that anybody else would realize that the carpet should be different or is different, but this apparently spiked the interest of that particular police officer who searched the house. And when that police officer cut that piece of carpet and lifted it up, saw that the wood underneath the carpet had blood all over it.
After reflecting on the bloody carpet, Jayce makes an eerie revelation.
It was likely within the week of that murder. But then again, it wasn't weird to see my brother in Walmart. My brother had several jobs where he was either being paid under the table in cash, or if he was getting a check, was cashing his checks at Walmart. So he would always kind of go in and search for my wife just to say hi. You know, it's his sister-in-law. They would be friendly. And my wife saw him and Jen without the children. I think that's the part that grabbed her attention the most. Having 4 children, and neither one of them owned a vehicle. So they had to borrow her grandmother's vehicle to go anywhere, to do anything. If Jerry was going to go out to lunch with our family, if they happened to be in town, she had to borrow a vehicle. That would be the one time that Jerry would not take his bicycle anywhere. So that grabbed my wife's attention. And I guess being in retail, you kind of just look and see what's in the cart. And she happened to see a carpet in the cart. It didn't make sense to her at the time. But just one of those weird, they have a new carpet. They're going to carpet their house. Okay, cool. You know, whatever. Sounds normal. It was shortly after that we had realized that Tony had been murdered. and that the carpet where the initial blood spilled all over the floor, they cut out of the regular carpet and just threw it across the street.
Shortly after the discovery of the bloody carpet, Jennifer was arrested. The following day, Jerry was arrested. They were both charged with murder. I asked Jayce if his brother's arrest shocked him, and if it was surprising that his brother had the capability to murder somebody.
Absolutely, it surprised me that he was capable of it. I had always believed that my brother was a bit stronger than most people. I never looked up to him, but physically, my brother could stand his own. And knowing Tony Mosick Sr., he wasn't an old, frail man with a cane on disability wobbling around his house. This man was up and moving. He was not strong, though. I mean, the day that he put his hands on me, one solid shove, and I could push him away from me. He wasn't very quick, but he was calculating. My brother was just powerful, just very, very strong in aggression. Would rip you around by your shirt and kind of sling you around. But it does kind of shock me that he was capable of murder. I never would have expected that.
A few weeks after their arrest, the body of Tony Mosick Sr. was found in the Lipsick River by a trapper. The discovery of Tony's body would lead to 5 felony charges against the pair: first-degree murder, possession of a deadly weapon during the commission of a felony, first-degree conspiracy, 4 counts of endangering the welfare of a child, and abusing a corpse. Jerry was charged with an additional felony, breach of release, for violating the conditions of his probation. Jayce wanted to share his own theory about the circumstances surrounding the disposal and then the discovery of Tony's body.
I don't know exactly what happened with the body, and I have my own thoughts and concerns about it that I, of course, can't prove. The police sonar scuba dive team and that picture sticks out in my mind being on the front page of this newspaper. And the fact that they couldn't find the body then, this had to have only been 2 weeks, maybe 3 weeks after the murder had occurred. And what really kind of struck me as really confusing was that they couldn't find it. They didn't know where to find it. And it was stupid enough that he went 100 yards away from the house. And when they went 100 yards away from the house and did this, and just threw the carpet across the street, I mean, that doesn't show the cunning ability of a murderous serial killer. That shows a stupid kid who cut the carpet and threw it across the street. I mean, again, they had to borrow her grandmother's SUV in order to do this. It was just really weird because, these guys are trained to find bodies. These guys are meant to find bodies and to do things like this, and they couldn't find it. Now I have a theory that I personally have a theory that the body was never put in the water. And again, I didn't want to talk to my brother about it because I didn't want to know. And I remember that there was nights that I was pulling up maps of that area, and I tried to see where could the body have gone. In 6 weeks, there's no way the body could have floated into the Atlantic Ocean. There's no way that the body could have gone anywhere. I mean, again, you have trained professionals who are there to try to find it and look for it. And how the hell are they missing this? Why is there still no body? It didn't make any sense. And I didn't understand it. I wanted to understand it. I wanted to get the idea of what was going on, but I couldn't figure it out. I had an idea that the body was actually kept in the house, or kept in the shed.
Jayce was having a hard time reconciling the brother he knew versus the man who was now plastered all over the local news stations and newspapers. However, that would not be what shocked him to his core.
Of course, I didn't want to believe it. You know, then again, he does have a hero complex. He wants to save the girl. That's how we were brought up. You take care of a woman, you protect her, you do everything you can to do that, to make sure that she doesn't have to, suffer. And he said that he did it. He confessed to it, but then recanted that statement. And I had a mental breakdown. I couldn't go to work for a couple of days. His face was all over the news. He was everywhere. His face, his image. I later found out that Jen and Jerry were able to communicate with one another inside the police department. My brother refused to talk. Jen refused to talk. And the arresting police officer and his partner left for lunch, or left for a couple of hours to go do something. And my brother, being manipulative, was able to convince a police officer to allow him to see Jen. And they were put in the same room. And this is actually in the court documents that this actually happened, while the initial arresting police officer and his partner were not in the police department at the time, or not even in the building. My brother was able to convince this police officer to allow him to speak to Jen, in which case whatever they said was never documented, never recorded. And that's when my brother said that he would take the blame for every bit of it. He was going to protect her and little Jerry, so that they would not be in jail, and she would not be in jail, and she would be able to go home to little Jerry. My brother was going to take the fall for all of it.
Jayce doesn't remember much of the trial. It's all a blur of proceedings and arguments. He does reflect candidly about an exchange he had in the courtroom.
They asked me how I knew my brother. How I knew my twin brother. And me being the sarcastic smartass that I am, I responded that we were roommates. That we've known each other all of our lives. That's my twin. I mean, what more could I have said? Like, my appearance didn't make that clear.
Before we continue with Jerry, it's important to note that Jennifer agreed to a plea in exchange for her testimony. The murder charge was dropped, and she was sentenced to 18 months in jail. This shocked the small Delaware community, but it almost seemed as if Jerry's fate was now sealed. He was going to spend the rest of his life in jail. Only what the prosecution didn't know was that Jerry was working on bribing an inmate with commissary if he promised to be an alibi witness for him. Would this be enough to set Jerry free?
I got a call from my mother, because my mother went as a observer to the court. And I was actually working from home that day, answering emails for a company. And when my mother called, she was in tears. And I'm like, "Yep, here we go. This is the news that I've been waiting for. This is gonna suck. Here we go. What did they say?" She said, "Not guilty." I'm like, "Shut up. What? Not guilty." And I dropped the phone and I collapsed and started crying on my stairwell.
Jayce may have thought that the nightmare he had been living for 2 years was over, but Jerry had more surprises up his sleeve.
Okay, so while we were in court, I kept hearing that there was another witness to what Jerry did, or to where Jerry was. There was an alibi witness for Jerry. I didn't know who it was. They wouldn't say the name in court. And nobody told me the name. in court. Jerry was supposed to get out on a Monday, and Jerry and I had talked about it. My wife and I had talked about it and said, well, Jerry's going to need a place to stay. We don't want him associating with the same people that he was associated with before. Let's give him a chance, and he can come stay with us for a while. We have a built-in babysitter. Maybe you and I can have a date night or something like that, get the hell away from the kids for a while, and let him watch his niece and nephew now that we know he's not a murderer. My wife and I went there and picked him up at the prison the day he was supposed to get out. And the first thing he does, of course, is ask for, a pack of cigarettes, a couple of phone calls. So he's calling a few people, and we're still in the prison parking lot. And it's probably a half-mile drive off the prison complex. He's in the back seat of the car. And we are still, like I said, in the prison parking lot. And he says to me, and my wife from the back seat, just want to let you guys know, because there's nothing they can do now about it. Otherwise, it would be considered double jeopardy. I killed Tony Mosick Sr. There was nothing I could say or do. I mean, my wife and I just kind of looked at each other like, okay, did he just say that, or are we like hallucinating that he said that? Never expected him to come right out and say something like that. It just wasn't. I spent the last almost 2 years believing that he didn't. I spent the last 2 years believing that he helped hide the body. He didn't kill somebody. I spent the last 2 years not fighting for his right, but fighting for my right. And by that I mean I spent the last 2 years fighting the court of public opinion for myself, not for him. I was tired of being the one that everybody looked at as the killer or the killer's brother. I didn't want that anymore. And I thought that this was finally over. And then he just outright and says that. And it's like my last 2 years of work that I put in to protect my name and my family just went down the toilet. And you just kind of let that fall right out of your mouth. You would think that you would keep something like that to yourself. You were just found not guilty. And it stuck out of my head. Wait a minute. There was an alibi witness. Who the hell was that? And he said, Philip Wright. Philip Wright and I attended school together at a school back in 2001. We weren't great friends, but he had been over my house several times. He knew Jerry. He knew my friends. Jerry knew my friends. Philip knew my brother, knew my family, knew my mom. And as soon as Jerry said Philip Wright was his alibi witness, I realized that Jerry wasn't just pulling my leg. I realized that this whole 2 years was Jerry working to be found not guilty of murder, to not be held responsible of murder. And I didn't know what to do. I didn't know why he got Philip Wright involved. I didn't know what else to say at that point. I'm pretty sure the rest of that ride home was set in silence. And then I brought my wife home, and I brought my brother to his lawyer's office because that's close to my house. And they went behind a closed door and talked for 45 minutes. My brother said that his lawyer promised him a book deal about it. And the lawyer gave him some cash so he can get up on his feet. And his lawyer also provided paperwork and started paperwork so that my brother can get all of his belongings back. But other than that, he had nothing. And I wasn't about to let him go over to a friend's house and get something. I rent my house. I don't own my house. I have rules that I have to follow, and that means no unannounced, uninvited guests. And I wasn't about to tell my landlord that my brother, who just spent the last 24 months in jail for murder, was found not guilty and he's living with me. So I kept my brother a secret. And it worked out well for a week until I let my brother use a laptop that I had installed Log Me In on. And I specifically did that so I can watch who he was talking to, because I didn't trust him after he just told me that he did in fact kill this guy. And from my phone, I watched my brother log into his email, log back into his Facebook, look at all the articles that he was tagged in, and then I watched him reach out to Jen.
You heard right. After being acquitted of murder, Jerry confessed to murdering Tony Mosick Sr. Double jeopardy laws mean that Jerry can never be tried for the murder of Tony again. There was no one left to take responsibility for his murder. Jerry seemed to believe that he was going to resume his life as usual, his life with Jennifer. But Jayce couldn't shake the feeling that he needed to do the right thing.
I didn't know what to do. I even called the police officer that was involved with the initial case, and I said, he's confessed to killing him. This is what he said in the back of the car leaving the prison. What can I do? I know those cops had a itch that they couldn't scratch, and I was scratching it for them. And I said, what is the best way that I can get you your confession? He says, you'll have to record it. They did take the details of his phone carrier, his provider. They also took the details of my provider. Didn't know if they were going to record my phone calls or not. I didn't particularly care. But I gave it one last shot, and I wanted to talk to my brother about it, and I called him on his phone. And I got a 5.5 minute long confession.
Here is the confession.
You say? Fabulous. What's bothering me, Jerry, is like I said, I took forever to believe you. You know what I mean?
Yes.
And then when I finally did, you lied to me and to everybody else that was involved with everything. You got Philip Wright involved as a witness, basically putting himself at jeopardy for this. And it bugs me because, dude, I put so much effort into believing you, and I put so much effort into trying to make sure that everything was squared away. And I put so much... Huh?
Pause right there. You put a lot of effort into believing which one, the fact that it didn't happen or the fact that it did.
I put effort into believing that you didn't do anything.
Okay, stop right there. I'm just fully filling so much in it, there's no room there.
What?
I told you. You came for a visit, and I told you. And then I come to find out that you told everybody else. So, and then you still turned around and testified after the fact, knowing what I told you. So
I tested because they never directly asked me that. And plus, when you told me that, I thought you were telling me that to protect Jen.
No.
I didn't know you were saying that because you actually did it.
Yes. But see, a lot of people are afraid because they don't know, I'm not saying what to believe, but they don't know why it happened. So they're afraid to even be around me. But Willoughby, I don't even know if you know this, but did you know her father tried to kill him? Tried to kill Jerry?
No.
Yes.
In my opinion, does it make it right that you killed him?
No.
But do you see where it hurts me though?
Yes.
Because
there's no, yeah.
Because you killed the guy.
Yes, and I understand that, but...
And then on top of that, you committed perjury on the stand and you lied about it.
Yes.
Just to come home and say, oh, this is what happened and there's nothing that they can do now because I've been found not guilty and I can't go to jail. You're rubbing it in the face of everybody that you killed this man.
Here's my thing, okay?
And that you lied about it.
Everyone says, everyone, okay? And I'm not saying you haven't, I'm not saying that you have, but You know, if I gave you the ultimatum right now, Jayce, I want to come over there, and if I want to kill Trinity or Tristan, you're like, nope, I'm going to kill you because you're not going to touch my fucking kids. I will severely beat your ass because you're not going to hurt my kids. Right or wrong? Just answer that, right or wrong.
You're right. I'll kill you before you kill them.
Okay. That was me.
Okay,
That was
but...
my take. I mean, yes, it happened 17 days before. But my biggest thing is, if I tell you, Jason, I want to kick your ass, then you're not going to want to be around me. Even when I see you, you might want to avoid me. But I'm going to give you the mentality of, okay, well, he's seen me a million times. He hasn't bothered me. Maybe he forgot about it. And then I'm going to catch you when you least expect it, so you have your guard down. Then I'm going to really fuck you up. You know, and that was my mentality. This was not a pre-planned exhibition.
But don't you think that if you had explained that, you know, he came at my son with a weapon or whatever, and I killed him in self-defense to protect my son or protect you know, an innocent child, that this would have went so much better and that people wouldn't hate you?
Why do you think I'm telling people the truth now?
You tell, in my opinion, I think you're telling people the truth now because there's nothing that can happen to you anymore.
True, but if I would have went on the stand and said, you know what, I killed him to protect my son, okay, well, you just admitted on the stand you killed him, you're going to jail for life. Sorry, bye.
Yeah, but if this had all started at the police station, you wouldn't have to worry about it.
And I did tell them all that. That's why I said I confessed to the crime. I told them this. It's in every transcript. It even says Schweiger even confessed to a crime.
Yeah, but then they also said that you recanted it and stuff.
No. Just like they said that I was offered a plea. Jen's always showed that I was offered a plea. Why didn't I take a plea? Because I was never offered a plea. I was never offered a chance to recant my statement. I was never... Why do you think I always had everyone else call my lawyer? Because he would never answer the fucking phone to me. Ever.
I seem awfully proud of that guy because he has a plaque in his office and keeps putting up on Facebook how he you know, got you acquitted. He got you acquitted because you committed perjury by getting Philip Brad involved and having him testify for you when he was probably never even around.
He wasn't.
He wasn't.
Believe it or not, I had a scheduled legal call. He was actually at the cell below me, and I was a tier man, and I was standing right in front of his cell when the building sergeant came to me and said, hey, by the way, you have a scheduled legal call with your lawyer, Andre Beauregard, tomorrow at X time. And the fellow goes, oh, you're not Beauregard? He goes, oh shit, you're here for the electric guard? He was like, yeah. He goes, dude, I got this. Don't even worry. I was like, huh? He goes, the less you know, the less you have to worry about.
Jayce turned the confession over to authorities. This is what they needed to charge Jayce Schweiger with perjury. And he was bitter towards his brother for turning him in. Jerry accepted a plea deal that sentenced him to 10 years. Jayce discusses his thoughts on not being named as the source of the confession.
I don't think people care who did it. I think now people are just happy that he is going to get some real time in jail. He finally has to answer for his crime. And I think that's the way I would like to see it. You know? Whoever turned him in, turned him in. You know, who gives a damn who it was? But it's done now. You know, people can probably sleep a little better at night.
Jerry's saga was finally over. Jay shared the status of his relationship with his brother now, and where his family stands.
What's my relationship with my brother like now? Good. We have an honor visit scheduled for July 5th, where I get to touch him, like give him a hug, bring him food, bring him pictures of kids, and things like that. And he invited me to be there. It's not like something I set up on my own. I think he's moved past it at this point. I think he's more interested in whatever he's doing in there. I saw him in January. I saw him in April. I haven't seen him since then. He knows that I turned him in. He knows that I recorded him. He wasn't happy about it. But once I explained that I'm not going to continue to have my family threatened, I think he understood that. Do I still fear what he may or may not do once he gets out? Yeah, I do. But what's our relationship like? Civil. Do I see any change in him? No. I see a prison mentality. My brother went and got evil twin tattooed on his knuckles. Going back to how many times do people ask us, hey, who's the evil twin? And think it's a joke? Well, now he has evil twin tattooed on his knuckles. He has a bunch of prison tattoos. I don't think he's remorseful. I think he's stuck there now, and he just has to deal with it. Where does our family stand? I still have an estranged relationship with my mother. My family believes that I did the right thing. My wife believes I shouldn't have gotten involved. But I don't openly talk about, I'm the one that turned him in. I'm the one that recorded him. I'm the one that did that. I don't talk about it. It just doesn't come up in conversation anymore. He was sentenced to 10 years in prison for perjury, conspiracy, tampering with a witness, etc. And he's been in there for 2 years. He has another 8 years to go. But a lot of my family believes that I did the right thing. And that's all that matters to me.
I personally was amazed by Jayce's story. Finding the thread in the podcast we listened to group offered me a great opportunity to connect with someone who had been through the ringer. Jayce didn't want to sensationalize his brother's story or his story. He just wanted to tell it. And my hope is that by coming on the show, this has helped him release the burden he was carrying. As you all know, I'm a big supporter of indie podcasts, and it just so happens that Jayce has his own.
Here's where I am now. I do a radio show, a morning radio show, Monday through Friday from 7 to 10 a.m. It's on WLANY. We are on iTunes, iHeartRadio, Podbean, Podsnack, Mixler, Spreaker, and we tape the show live. We also live stream the show while we're taping it so people get to see us and join us in conversation. But I don't use my last name on the air. That's where I'm at. I'm to the point now where I can kind of talk to the public. I can kind of be in the public eye and still have my own life. Eric, Gina, Jimmy, everybody that's on the show, all the listeners have been really supportive. Yes, so you guys know my brother's incarcerated, etc. But that's if we bring up a story about prison or whatever. But the fact knowing that 150,000 people a month listen to our show between all of those platforms, it means that 150,000 people aren't judging me because of his actions anymore. And it's probably one of the greatest things that ever happened to me. I've been doing this show now for 2 years. I love it. I love every bit of it. We just hit our 500 show mark. So I couldn't ask for better people to do a show with. So if you want to check it out, www.wliny.com or www.copandcalamity.com. That's KOP. And you can hear our show. And it's also on iTunes, iHeartRadio, Podbean, Podsnack, Mixler, Spreaker. And you can watch us do our show live, Monday through Friday from 7 to 10. And I want to thank you, Lainey, for letting me join you and do this and giving me a chance to express some thoughts that I haven't thought about in 5 years. So thank you.
In case you didn't catch the show name, it's called Cop and Calamity Morning Show. I put the links in the show notes. Jayce, I just want to say that it was an honor to have you on the show. Thank you for trusting me to tell your story. Okay, fan club members, as I conclude this episode, my one question to you is, how will you sleep tonight? Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to subscribe, rate, and review on Apple Podcasts. It really helps us out. You can find us on most social media platforms, Twitter @TCFCPod, Facebook.com/TCFC Podcast. You can also find us on Instagram, TCFC_podcast. And of course, our website is truecrimefanclub.com. If you have an episode request or general suggestion, you can send me an email, tcfcpod@gmail.com. I would like to welcome to the club our most recent Patreon supporters, Heather K., Cambo from True Crime Island, the Lake Lucy Murder Mystery Guild, Karen P., Kristen W., Kim S., Melanie L., Karen S., and Christy with the Canadian True Crime Podcast. Our music for the show was provided by We Talk of Dreams, who created custom music just for us. Check them out on Twitter at We Talk of Dreams. Research assistance, content editing, general being a badass, and being a great friend was provided by Brittany Martinez. Audio engineering and editing was provided by a great listener, Benjamin Sutton. Thank you so much. I recently started a Facebook discussion group where we can discuss the cases more in depth. Just search for True Crime Fan Club discussion group, and one of our lovely mods will add you. Jayce will be there to answer your questions about the case. Before I go, I want to thank you for your patience with this episode. It was a labor of love. It was my first interview, and I didn't realize how intense it is. So for those podcasters who do interviews, kudos to you. You do an amazing job. It is so hard. I am working on the next episode, and I do plan to release a preview of a Patreon episode. So you're probably going to get 3 episodes in June. Thank you again for your support. You guys are amazing. While you're waiting for the next episode, check out some of my pod friend shows.
January 24th, 2006, Jennifer Kesse disappeared from her home in Orlando, Florida. Unconcluded is a real-time investigation into that disappearance. You can listen and subscribe on unconcluded.com.
So we're still waiting for that one person to come through with the one bit of information that could bring Jennifer home.
I'm the mother.
I'm the daughter. And we're the Crime Girls. Hi, y'all. If you like your true crime with a touch of banter, or vice versa, and a southern accent, you should join us at Crime Girls Podcast.
We discuss lesser-known true crime cases, crime news, and our dogs.
You can find us on iTunes, SoundCloud, Google Play, and Stitcher. Thank you.
Bye!
I'm Liz.
And I'm Bill.
We're the hosts of Sift the Podcast.
It's a podcast where we bake and talk deep theory.
Ever wonder why everyone else gets Nietzsche but you don't?
Or what it would be like if your friend made you bake a bunch of stuff against your will?
What about the origins of the word mesmerize?
What makes modernists shitty?
What does Frank Lloyd Wright have to do with adultery, cults, and murder?
What about Donald Trump, gaslighting, and George Orwell?
Is Ayn Rand an actual sociopath?
What do grocery stores have in common with one of the worst artists ever, Jeff Koons?
Listen to all this and more on Sift the Podcast, available on iTunes, SoundCloud, Stitcher, and Google Play.
Hey guys, I'm Haley.
And I'm Lindsay.
And we're your hosts of Curiosity Kills, a true crime podcast known for its detail and appreciated for its humor.
And as with any gruesome subject matter, this podcast isn't for the faint at heart, or anyone that has an aversion to explicit language.
Our goal was to record the conversations we were already having about serial killers and other true crime topics.
I mean, we find each other hilarious, but apparently our conversations in the break room scared a few people. I mean, whatever.
A year and almost 100 recordings later, we're laughing harder than ever.
We still believe that hooker lives matter, and there's always something funny that can be found in the awful.
Even if it's just making fun of each other for stumbling over words or going on random tangents.
Join us in the Mobile Beats Lab as we make our way through various true crime topics and derailments.
The only promises we can make to you are that research will be done,
topics will be covered in detail,
and insensitive jokes will probably definitely be made.
Join us, the two Curiosity Kills weirdos, for our entertaining jaunts down the rabbit hole that is true crime.
You can subscribe through iTunes, Stitcher, and just about any podcast platform in between.
Follow us on Twitter at Cure Kills Podcast and Facebook at Curiosity Kills Podcast.
See you down the rabbit hole!